with its Asia-Pacific rebalance strategy. China's rise made China the new challenger to the dollar's global dominance. The fights over the Diao Islands and the Huangyan Island were the U.S.'s latest attempt to suppress its challenger. Though these two political events around China's border didn't cause a large amount of capital to flee out of China, the Americans achieved their partial goals. Two of China's efforts died. At the beginning of 2012, China, Japan, and South Korea were close to reaching an agreement on the negotiation of the Northeast Asia FTA. In April 2012, China and Japan had also reached a preliminary agreement on currency exchange and on holding each other's national debts. However, the conflict over the Diao Islands and Huangyan Island occurred, blowing away the FTA and the currency exchange. A few years later, China finally finished the negation with South Korea on the bilateral FTA, but it does not have much significance. Why? The original Northeast Asia FTA, once established, would include China, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. It would be the third largest economy in the world, with a size of over $20 trillion. Furthermore, it would likely expand south to integrate with the ASEAN FTA, forming the East Asia FTA. That would become the largest economy in the world, with a magnitude of over $30 trillion in size. We can further imagine that the East Asia FTA could continue expanding, adding India and South Asia in the south, the 5 Central Asian countries in the north, and the West Asia countries, part of the Middle East, in the west. This Asia FTA would then have a scale surpassing $50 trillion, more than the EU and US combined. For such a big FTA, would it use the euro or the dollar to settle its internal trade? Of course not. This meant that the Asian dollar would be born. I think, if indeed there is an Asia FTA, we should promote the renminbi to be the primary currency of Asia, just as the US dollar first became the currency of North America and then the currency of the world. Pushing the renminbi to the international stage is far more than what we talked about previously with the renminbi going abroad or letting the renminbi play a role on the One Belt, One Path. It will, along with the dollar and the euro, share the world. If the Chinese could think of this, couldn't the Americans think of it? When the Americans announced that they would shift their focus to the east, they pushed the Japanese to create an issue over the Diao Islands and they supported the Philippines to have a confrontation with China over the Huangyan Island. We can't be so naive as to think this was just caused by the right-wing Japanese or by the Philippines' President Aquino. It was the Americans' deep and careful thought to prevent the renminbi from being a challenger to the dollar. The Americans were very clear about what they were doing. If the Northeast Asia FTA were formed, with its chain reaction, the renminbi, the euro, and the dollar each would claim 1/3 of the world trading market. Then for the US, would it still have the currency hegemony if it had only 1/3 of it? Without a real economy, if it were to lose its currency hegemony, how could the US remain as the world's dominator? Once one understands this, he will know why, behind every one of China's problem, the US is there. The US is preventing China's trouble, to the US, up front. Thus it has created troubles for China everywhere. What does the US try to rebalance in the Asia-Pacific? Does it really want to play the role of balancer between China and Japan, China and the Philippines, and China and other countries? Of course not. It has only one goal in mind: nullify the trend of China's rise. 3. The secret that the U.S. military is fighting for the dollar. A. The Iraq War and whose currency was used for royal trades. People all say that the strength of the U.S. is based on 3 pillars: currency, technology, and military force. Actually today we can see that the real backbone of the U.S. is its currency and military force. The backing of its currency is its military force. Every country in the world spends a large amount of money when it has a war. The U.S., however, is unique. It can also make money while spending money on a war. No other country can do that. Why did the Americans fight a war in Iraq? Many people would answer, for oil. However, did the Americans truly fight for oil? No. If they indeed fought for oil, why didn't they take a single barrel of oil out of Iraq? Also, the crude oil price jumped to $149 a barrel after the war from a pre-war price of $38 a barrel. The American people didn't get a low oil price after its army occupied Iraq. Therefore, the U.S. fought the war not for oil, but for the dollar. Why? The reason was simple. To control the world, the U.S. needed the whole world to use the dollar. It was a great move in 1973 to force Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries to install the dollar as the settlement currency for oil trades. Once you understand that, you can understand why the U.S. fought a war in an oil-producing country. The direct result of fighting a war in an oil-producing country was to increase the price of oil. Once the oil price shot up, the demand for the dollar also went up. For example, if you had $38, you could buy a barrel of crude oil before the war. After the war, the price went up over 4 times to $149. Your $38 could only get you a quarter of a barrel. How could you get the other 3/4? You had to use your products and resources to trade the Americans for dollar. Then the U.S. government could openly, legitimately print more dollars. This was the secret. I also want to tell everyone, the U.S.'s war in Iraq was not only for that goal. It was also to keep the dollar's hegemony. Saddam didn't support terrorists or Al-Qaeda, nor did it have weapons of mass destruction. But why was he still hung? It was because he played a game between the US and EU. After the euro was created in 1999, he announced that Iraq's oil trade would be settled in euros. This angered the Americans, especially when many other countries followed suit. Russian President Putin, Iranian President Ahmadinejad, and Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez all made the same announcement. How could the Americans accept this? Some people may think what I said was a fairy tale. Let's take a look at what the America did after it won the Iraq War. Before they arrested Saddam, the Americans rushed to form the temporary Iraqi government. The first order that the temporary government published was to announce that the Iraqi oil trade switched from the euro back to the dollar for settlement. This showed that America was fighting for its dollar. B. The Afghanistan War and the net flow of capital. Someone may say, I can see that, the Americans fought the Iraq War for the dollar. Afghanistan does not produce oil. Then it shouldn't be for the dollar that the Americans fought the Afghanistan War. Also, the war was after the September 11th attack. The whole world knew it was to revenge the Al-Qaeda and punish the Taliban, which supported the Al-Qaeda. Was that true? The Afghanistan War started a month after September 11th. It started in a rush. By the middle of the war, America used up all of its cruise missiles. As the war continued, the U.S. Defense Department had to open its nuclear weaponry. It took out 1,000 nuclear cruise missiles, replaced the nuclear warheads with conventional warheads, and fired another 900 cruise missiles to win the war. Obviously the Americans were not ready for this war. Why did they rush into it? That's because the Americans couldn't wait any longer. Their financial life was in big trouble. In the early 21st century, as a country without raw material producing industries, to keep it running at the current level, the U.S. needed to have a net inflow of $700 billion from other countries every year. After the September 11th event, the global investors showed great concern about the investment environment in the U.S. As a result, $300 billion fled from the U.S. This forced the U.S. to fight a war quickly to stop the fleeing. It was not only to punish the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, but also to rebuild the global investors' confidence. After the first cruise missiles exploded in Kabul, the Dow Jones Index jumped up 600 points in one day. The capital that left the U.S. started to flow back. By the end of 2001, $400 billion came back to the U.S. This showed again that the Afghanistan war was fought for the dollar and for capital. C. Why will the prompt global strike system replace aircraft carriers? Many Chinese have great hope for China's aircraft carrier. They have seen aircraft carriers' importance in the past, and China's Liaoning ship let China join the rank of owners of aircraft carriers. However, though the aircraft carrier is still a symbol for a major power in the world, it is now only a symbol. That is because the aircraft carrier is a product of the logistics era. When Great Britain was at its peak, it pushed for global trade, it sent its products to the world and took back the world's resources, so it needed a strong navy to ensure safety over the water. The creation of the aircraft carrier also served to control the ocean and the sea path. At that time the saying was, "Logistics is the key." Whoever controlled the ocean controlled the flow of global wealth. Now capital is the key. A few strokes on a computer keyboard can move billions or even trillions of dollars of capital from one location to another. An aircraft carrier can keep up with the speed of logistics, but it can't keep up with the flow of capital. It is thus unable to control global capital. Then today, what measure can keep up with the direction, speed, and volume of the flow of global capital over the Internet? American is developing a huge prompt global strike system that will allow it to hit any capital-concentrated region with ballistic missiles, supersonic planes, and cruise missiles that travel at 5 or 10 times sonic speed. The U.S. claims that it can hit any place on the Earth in 28 minutes. No matter where capital is, as long as the Americans do not want it to be there, its missiles can go there in 28 minutes and drive the capital out. This is why the prompt global strike system will inevitably replace aircraft carriers. Of course, the aircraft carrier also has its own value, such as safeguarding the sea path or conducting a humanitarian mission. It is a good platform over the sea. 4. The air-sea battle will not solve the U.S.'s problem. America brought up the concept of air-sea battle when designing responses to China's rise. It was first introduced in 2010. As a war concept, it meant jointly combining the powers of the Air Force and the Navy when fighting against China. The creation of this concept showed that the American military was getting weaker. In the past, the U.S. thought that it could use either airstrikes or the Navy to strike China. Now it finds that the use of only one source does not provide it with military superiority over China. It needs to join the two forces together. That's how this air-sea battle concept came into being. The Americans think that China and the U.S. won't get into a war in the next 10 years. After studying China's military development, the Americans realize that the U.S.'s current military capability does not guarantee itself an advantage over China's strengths, such as China's ability to attack aircraft carriers and to destroy space systems. Therefore, the U.S. needs to spend another 10 years to develop a more advanced battle system to offset China's advantage. It may mean that the U.S. has moved the timetable of a war with China to 10 years from now. Though there may not be a war for 10 years, we must prepare ourselves for it. If we don't want a war to happen in 10 years, we need to get our things done within the next 10 years, including preparing for war. V. The strategic meaning of the One Belt, One Road strategy. The Americans like basketball and boxing. Boxing shows the Americans' typical nature of respecting power, a direct hit with full strength and the hope of knocking the opponent out. Everything is straightforward. The Chinese are quite the opposite. Chinese prefer ambiguity and using softness to conquer strength. One doesn't seek to knock his opponent out, but he will defuse all of his opponent's attacks. Chinese like Tai Chi, which is a higher level of art than boxing. The One Belt, One Road strategy reflects this philosophy. Throughout history, whenever